Your biggest advantage is no one knows who you are, Carl Jung. There is a peculiar kind of power that belongs to people almost no one notices, not because they lack ability, but because they have never needed anyone to see them in order to feel real. In a culture obsessed with visibility, with being known, followed, recognized, validated by strangers who will forget them in seconds, Carl Jung would point to something almost nobody wants to hear. The person nobody knows is often standing on the most solid psychological ground of anyone in the room. Obscurity, the very thing modern life treats as a failure to be corrected, may in fact be one of the last remaining conditions under which a person can actually become themselves. To understand why, you have to understand what Jung believed happens to a person the moment they become known. Being known by others requires constructing something for those others to know. Jung called this construction the persona, the curated face a person presents to the world, built specifically to be perceived, understood, and approved of by an audience. The problem is not that a persona exists. Everyone needs one to function in society. The problem is what happens when a person begins living primarily for the persona rather than for themselves, which becomes almost unavoidable the moment enough eyes are watching. Once you are known, every choice starts to carry the weight of an audience. What will they think? How will this look? Does this match the version of me they already believe in? The self, quietly and without any dramatic moment marking the change, begins optimizing for perception instead of for truth. This is why Jung considered obscurity, real and total anonymity, one of the rarest conditions for authentic psychological development. When no one is watching, there is no audience to perform for, no image to maintain, no gap to manage between what you actually are and what you have let others believe you are. Whatever you do in that space, you do because you actually want to, or because it is actually true to you, not because it will be interpreted a certain way by people who have already decided who you are. Jung believed that a huge portion of what people call their personality is in fact a negotiated settlement with an audience, a compromise between who they are and who they are permitted to be by everyone watching. Remove the audience, and something strange happens. The negotiation ends. What's left, whatever that turns out to be, is closer to the real thing. This helps explain why so many people who suddenly gain visibility, whether through success, fame, or simply being seen and defined by a group they belong to, often report a disorienting sense of losing themselves precisely at the moment everyone assumes they should feel most fulfilled. Jung would say, this is not a coincidence or a rare psychological fragility. It is the entirely predictable result of a self that has started organizing around being known, rather than around being true. The more people who hold an image of you in their minds, the more that image begins exerting a kind of gravity, pulling your actual behavior toward matching it, whether or not it was ever accurate to begin with. Being unknown removes that gravity entirely. There is no image out there demanding to be maintained. There is only you, alone with whatever you actually are. Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a complete and distinct self, depends heavily on this kind of unwitnessed space. He believed that a person cannot fully individuate while constantly filtering their inner life through the question of how it will be received. Individuation requires trial, error, contradiction, false starts, embarrassing detours, versions of yourself you try on and discard. This kind of experimentation is nearly impossible to do honestly with an audience, because an audience remembers. An audience holds you to your previous positions. An audience punishes inconsistency, even though inconsistency, false starts, and contradiction are the actual raw material of real growth. The unknown person can fail privately, change their mind privately, discover they were wrong about something fundamental privately, without any of it becoming part of a permanent public record that has to be explained, defended, or lived down. There is a specific danger Jung identified in being known too early, before a person has actually finished forming, and it applies just as much today as it did in his time, perhaps more. When other people form a fixed idea of who you are, before you have finished discovering that yourself, you face constant unconscious pressure to become consistent with their expectation, rather than consistent with your own unfolding truth. This is why people who achieve visibility very young so often describe feeling trapped by a version of themselves that solidified before they had any say in it. The audience fell in love with an early draft and refused to let it be revised. Someone who remains unknown carries no such obligation. They are permitted, without any external agreement, to be an entirely different person next year, next month, even tomorrow. And no one will accuse them of betraying who they were supposed to be, because no one had formed an opinion about who that was in the first place. Jung also pointed to something quieter and more important underneath all of this, which concerns where a person's sense of worth is actually rooted. Someone who depends on being known for their sense of value has, whether they realize it or not, placed the foundation of their identity outside themselves, in the hands of an audience that can withdraw its attention at any moment, for reasons that often have nothing to do with them at all. This is an extraordinarily unstable place to build a self. The moment the audience's attention shifts, and it always eventually shifts, the foundation goes with it. Jung believed that real psychological stability comes only from a source that cannot be taken away by other people losing interest. And obscurity paradoxically protects a person from ever building their foundation on something that fragile in the first place. If your sense of self was never dependent on being seen, it cannot be destabilized by being unseen. None of this means Jung believed ambition, achievement, or even eventual visibility were inherently corrupting. What he was pointing to was the order in which these things happen, and what they are built on. A self that has already formed in private, that has already tested its own values without needing approval, that already knows who it is independent of any audience, can handle later visibility without being reshaped by it. But a self that is still forming, still uncertain, still searching, and becomes known before that process has had any real privacy in which to unfold, is far more likely to be permanently distorted by the process, molded into whatever shape earns the most approval, rather than whatever shape is actually true. This reframes obscurity from something to escape into something closer to a resource to protect, at least for a period. The years spent unnoticed are not wasted years, empty of significance because no one was watching them happen. They are frequently the years in which the actual foundation gets built, tested privately, revised without consequence, and eventually solidified into something real enough to survive contact with an audience later, if that ever becomes relevant at all. Jung would likely say that the person who resents being unknown, who experiences their own obscurity as a kind of humiliation or proof of insignificance, has already made a quiet but consequential decision about where their worth comes from, and that decision is worth examining honestly, rather than accepting as simply how things are. There is also something to be said about the specific kind of freedom obscurity grants that visibility structurally cannot. An unknown person can speak an unfinished, half-formed thought out loud and revise it later, without it being permanently attached to their name. They can pursue an interest badly, clumsily, as an amateur, without anyone treating the attempt itself as a public event to be judged. They can change direction entirely, walk away from something they once cared about, admit they were wrong about something they once argued for passionately, all without managing a narrative for anyone else's benefit. This kind of freedom to be inconsistent, to be a work in progress without an audience grading the draft, is precisely the condition under which Jung believed real transformation becomes possible. Because transformation requires the ability to be someone different tomorrow than you were today. And an audience, however well-meaning, almost always resists exactly that. What Jung ultimately suggests is that the discomfort of being unknown, the sting of walking through a world where almost no one has any idea who you are, is not actually evidence of failure or insignificance. It may be evidence of something closer to protection, an unusually rare set of conditions under which a person is free to become whoever they are actually becoming, rather than whoever an audience has already decided they should be. The advantage is not that obscurity feels comfortable. Often it doesn't. The advantage is that it is honest, unwitnessed, and entirely your own. And there are very few periods in a modern life where that is still true. Whether or not visibility ever comes later, what gets built in that unseen space tends to be the only part of a person that was never negotiated with anyone else's expectations in the first place. And that, more than anything achieved in public, is usually the part that turns out to be real.